silver goblet shattered across the auction floor, just as the chained girl collapsed at the feet of a nobleman. Nobody had dared to approach all evening. The crowded hall fell silent at once, because the man standing before her was Duke Renwick Veilahart, the cold ruler whose name alone could empty a room faster than thunder. But he was not staring at the frightened girl. He was staring at the small leather charm hanging from her wrist. The color drained from his face so suddenly that even the auction master stepped backward. Moments earlier, men had been bidding on her as though she were nothing more than property dragged from a fallen estate. Now the Duke was climbing onto the platform himself, fury burning in his eyes, while guards rushed toward him from every side. Nobody understood why one trembling servant girl could shake a man known for never showing mercy. Then she whispered a single name, and the Duke nearly dropped to his knees. The hall erupted into panic when he ordered the doors sealed shut because, according to him, someone inside that room had buried a terrible secret for 17 years. Yet, the greater shock came when the frightened girl fainted in his arms, and an old physician revealed she carried something no doctor could explain, not wealth or power, but a miracle. Tell me honestly before we continue, do you think the Duke already knew who she was, or do you believe fate trapped them together that night for another reason entirely? Think about that carefully and drop your answer in the comments. I'll surely check and respond to all. Now, before we continue, I need to know which beautiful part of the world you are watching from. And if you enjoy emotional historical stories filled with secrets, betrayal, and impossible love, subscribe now because this mystery becomes far darker than the auction itself. The iron gates of Marrowgate Auction House slammed open before the final bell finished ringing, and the sound rolled through the marble hall like a warning no one dared to ignore. Guards in heavy coats rushed in first, scanning the crowd, while the nobles inside stiffened in their velvet chairs as if the air itself had turned dangerous. Chains dragged across the floor. Moments later, a young woman stumbled forward, wrists bound, her steps unsteady from exhaustion rather than resistance. Dust clung to her hair, and her gaze stayed lowered, as though even looking up might invite punishment. The auction master raised his hand to silence the hall, but no silence came. Whispers spread instead, sharp and restless. She had no family name spoken aloud, only a number marked on parchment. Lot 17. From the far end of the hall, a man stood without permission. He did not rise like the others. He simply appeared upright, as though the very idea of sitting beneath this event insulted him. Renwick Veilahart. No one said his name out loud, yet every person in the room felt it travel through them. He was not the kind of noble who attended auctions. He ruled lands where disputes ended before they became public, and where silence was more valuable than gold. His eyes did not move to the bidding crowd. They stayed on the girl, not with interest, not with pity, with recognition sharp enough to fracture control. The auction master struck the podium. Begin bidding. Gold was offered immediately. A merchant from the eastern trade ports called out a sum that made the audience gasp. A second voice followed, richer, louder. The girl flinched at every rise in price, as if each number struck her personally. Renwick did not bid. Not yet. He stepped forward only when a masked noble laughed and raised the price again, treating her like a prize carved from stone. The sound that left Renwick's throat was quiet, but it silenced nearby murmurs instantly. "I will take her," he said. No number followed. The hall paused. Then laughter broke out in scattered pockets. It was not disbelief alone. It was disbelief wrapped in insult. The auction master blinked rapidly. "Your Grace, bidding must follow." "I did not come to compete," Renwick replied. The girl lifted her eyes for the first time, and something inside the hall shifted. Her gaze met his, and her breath caught as though she had been waiting for him longer than she understood. Chains clinked as her hands trembled slightly, but she did not look away. The masked noble who had been winning the bids leaned forward. Even a duke must respect order here. Renwick finally turned his head. It was a slow movement, almost calm, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "Order," he repeated softly, "is what I am restoring." No one spoke after that. The auction master tried once more, voice weaker. "We require proper valuation." Renwick removed a ring from his hand and placed it on the table below the podium. It was not ornate. It carried a seal known across provinces for settling disputes without trial. The hall went still. Even the guards stopped moving. The auction master stared at the ring longer than he should have, then swallowed hard. "Lot 17 is transferred." A sound escaped the girl. Not a word, not a cry. Something caught between disbelief and fear. Renwick stepped closer to the stage. Up close, she looked smaller. Not fragile exactly, but worn in a way that suggested survival had been her only companion for a long time. There were marks on her wrists where chains had rested too long, and dust in the lines of her skin as if she had been forgotten, between places that no longer claimed her. He reached out not to touch her, but to release the chain lock. The metal resisted. For a brief moment, his fingers paused. The girl spoke for the first time, voice barely steady. "You should not do this." Renwick did not look at her. Too late. The lock snapped open. The sound echoed like something final. But instead of relief, the girl staggered backward as if freedom itself was unfamiliar. Her hand instinctively gripped something hidden beneath her sleeve. A small leather charm worn smooth at the edges. The moment she touched it, Renwick's attention sharpened again. The auction hall remained silent, but something heavier filled the air. He saw it clearly now. That charm was not ordinary. It carried markings from a place erased from official records, a place tied to his past. Before anyone could ask questions, the girl suddenly swayed. Her strength collapsed without warning, and she would have fallen straight onto the stone floor if Renwick had not stepped forward quickly enough to steady her. He caught her only long enough to lower her safely. No embrace, no softness, only control preventing impact. A physician from the crowd rushed forward after a delayed pause. He checked her pulse, pressed 2 fingers to her wrist, then froze. "This is impossible," the physician muttered. Renwick's eyes narrowed. "Speak clearly." The physician hesitated, then leaned closer as if afraid the words themselves would be dangerous. "She is carrying life within her." The hall erupted. Voices collided instantly, disbelief breaking into panic and confusion. Nobles stood from their seats. The auction master dropped his gavel. The girl, still half-conscious, did not hear it. But Renwick did. And for the first time since entering the hall, something inside him cracked through his control. Not shock alone, recognition. Because the physician had not finished speaking. "There is something unusual," the physician continued, voice trembling. "This is not ordinary. It is protected. I have never seen anything like it." The masked noble from earlier laughed sharply. "You are saying the auction just sold a mystery instead of a servant." But Renwick was no longer listening to him. His gaze returned to the leather charm, and then to the girl. A memory, buried and sealed, tried to surface. The kind of memory that should not exist anymore. He rose slowly, ordering the hall doors shut without raising his voice. Steel guards moved instantly. Panic grew louder. Someone shouted that this was unlawful. Someone else demanded an explanation. But Renwick only said one thing: "No one leaves." The words settled like iron. The girl stirred faintly in his arms as he lifted her with careful restraint, finally removing her from the cold stone floor. Outside the hall, thunder rolled in the distance, though no storm had been predicted. Inside, every noble realized the same thing at once. The auction had not ended. It had only begun, and the girl at the center of it was not just a purchase. She was a missing piece of a story no one in that room was ready to remember. Her name was Leora Mirwen. Now tell me, if you were inside that hall, would you trust the Duke's silence or fear what he already knows? And what do you think is hidden inside that leather charm she carries? I will be watching the comments closely to see who gets it right. The doors of Marrowgate Auction House slammed shut with a force that echoed through every corridor, sealing the nobles inside like birds caught in a gilded cage. Leora Mirwen lay motionless on a velvet stretcher placed near the raised platform, her breathing shallow but steady as the physician kept watch over her condition. Renwick Veilheart stood at the edge of the platform, his gaze never leaving her face, while the auction master nervously wiped sweat from his forehead, unsure whether to speak or remain silent. The physician finally broke the silence, lowering his voice, as if even the walls might betray him if they heard too much. He said that Leora's condition was not ordinary, that the life within her carried signs of protection that did not belong to any known medical explanation. A murmur swept through the sealed hall, growing louder as frightened nobles began to question whether the auction had unknowingly sold something far more dangerous than a servant. Leora's fingers twitched near the leather charm hidden beneath her sleeve, and Renwick noticed the movement instantly, his expression tightening as though a distant memory had been disturbed. He stepped closer without speaking, ignoring the rising panic around him, because the charm she carried was etched with a symbol that belonged to a sealed history he had once sworn to forget. The physician backed away slightly, insisting that whatever was inside her body was not a curse and not a sickness, but something guarded by forces beyond court knowledge. Renwick ordered the hall kept sealed, his voice calm yet absolute, and no one dared question him as soldiers moved to block every exit with immediate obedience. Leora slowly opened her eyes again, this time fixing them on Renwick, as if trying to recall a promise made long before she had been captured and brought to this place. Her lips parted slightly, and though her voice was weak, she managed to speak a name that caused the entire room to fall into uneasy silence. That name was not spoken aloud in noble circles, and when Renwick heard it, his hand tightened at his side, as if restraining something far stronger than emotion. The auction master attempted to regain control, but his voice cracked as he demanded explanation from Renwick, who did not even look in his direction. Instead, Renwick lifted the leather charm from where it had loosened near Leora's wrist, studying its markings with an intensity that made even the guards hesitate. The moment he turned it slightly, a faint engraving became visible, and every noble present recognized that it was not meant to exist in public hands. Leora's breathing quickened again, and the physician rushed forward, warning that her condition was stabilizing in an unnatural way that defied ordinary understanding. Renwick finally spoke her full name again, slower this time, as though testing whether it belonged to the present or to a forgotten past. Leora Mirwen is the name confirmed. The hall remained sealed, but tension inside it grew heavier, as though the very air was waiting for something to awaken. Outside the sealed building, thunder rolled again, and distant horse hooves gathered near the gates as if drawn by the same unseen force. Renwick instructed his guards to bring every witness inside, one by one, beginning with those who had first presented the girl for auction. One merchant refused at first, but after seeing Renwick's expression, he complied without further resistance. The merchant explained that Leora had been found near the border ruins, carrying no identity except the charm that now lay in Renwick's hand. At those words, Renwick's eyes darkened because the border ruins were tied to an event he had long tried to erase from history. Leora stirred again, whispering fragments of memory that no one in the room could fully understand. Renwick ordered that she be kept under watch, not as prisoner, not as guest, but as something far more important than either. Leora's hand tightened around the charm again, and for a brief instant, the markings on it seemed to respond with a faint warmth. A sealed chamber beneath the auction house was opened by Renwick's order, revealing old ledgers that no one had touched for decades. The physician insisted that whatever power surrounded Leora was stabilizing her life rather than harming it, which made it even more alarming. Renwick studied the ledgers, finding references to a hidden lineage marked only by symbols identical to the charm. This discovery made his expression shift, because such lineage was believed to have ended long before current kingdoms were formed. Leora suddenly spoke again, asking why the man who saved her looked at her as if she was both familiar and forgotten. Renwick did not answer immediately, his silence stretching until even the guards felt uneasy. He finally said that her presence should not exist in the present world, if the records were correct. Leora looked away, gripping the charm more tightly, as though it was the only proof of her own identity. The sealed hall grew colder as night fully settled, and candles flickered against the heavy silence. Renwick ordered preparations for Leora to be moved to his estate under strict protection before dawn arrived. Leora hesitated when told, not because she feared him, but because she feared what he might already know about her past. Renwick noticed her hesitation and ordered the guards to wait, allowing her a rare moment of stillness. The physician quietly warned Renwick that her condition might change suddenly if emotional stress increased. Renwick replied that he was already aware, as if he had seen such a case before in a life he no longer acknowledged. Leora was guided carefully through a narrow corridor toward a waiting carriage, though she insisted on walking without support. Outside, rain began to fall lightly, blurring the lantern lights and turning the streets into shimmering reflections. Renwick placed his coat over Leora's shoulders without touching her directly, ensuring she remained steady against the cold air. Leora glanced at him, noticing for the first time that his expression carried restraint rather than indifference. She asked softly where she was being taken, and Renwick answered only that the truth would come in layers, not all at once. Leora tightened her grip on the charm again, as if it was the only anchor keeping her from disappearing into uncertainty. Renwick's carriage moved through the quiet streets toward his estate, where more answers waited behind locked doors. The auction house faded behind them, but its secrets seemed to follow like shadows that refused to be left behind. Inside the carriage, silence pressed between them, heavy and unbroken, until Leora finally spoke again in a faint voice. She said she did not remember how she came to the auction, only that the charm was always with her, even before she understood its meaning. Renwick listened without interruption, his eyes fixed forward, as though the road ahead carried answers buried in time. He finally told her that her life had likely been erased from records for reasons tied to something larger than either of them. Leora asked if that meant she had no place in the world, and the question lingered heavily between them. Renwick did not answer at once, because he was remembering a promise made in a forgotten past that involved the same symbol she carried. The carriage slowed as it reached the gates of Valahart Estate, where stone pillars rose like silent watchers under the night sky. Leora looked out and felt an unfamiliar sense that she was not arriving somewhere new, but returning to something long forgotten. Renwick stepped down first, then turned to help her carefully from the carriage without breaking his own distance. Leora paused at the threshold, staring at the estate as if it recognized her presence. Renwick instructed the staff to prepare a private chamber for her, ensuring no one questioned her arrival. Leora was guided inside, but she paused briefly when she noticed portraits along the corridor that seemed strangely familiar. Renwick remained behind her, watching carefully, as though he was waiting for her memory to awaken fully. Leora touched the wall lightly as she passed, and for a moment she felt a faint pulse beneath her fingers. Renwick finally spoke again, telling her that the estate had once belonged to families tied to her unknown origin. Leora turned to him, asking if he believed she truly belonged anywhere at all. Renwick answered that belonging was not something granted by names, but something revealed by truth. Leora stood quietly, holding the charm again as if it carried the only certainty she trusted. Renwick watched her for a long moment, realizing that whatever miracle the physician spoke of was not separate from her existence, but bound to it. Leora whispered that she was tired of being treated like a secret instead of a person. Renwick replied that secrets were often the only reason people survived long enough to discover who they were. She looked toward the distant halls of the estate, sensing that her story was only beginning. Renwick ordered that no guest be informed of her presence, because what came next would not survive public attention. Leora finally followed the staff deeper into the estate, her steps steadier than before. Though uncertainty still lingered in her eyes, Renwick remained at the entrance for a moment longer, staring into the darkened sky as if searching for answers that refused to come. Leora disappeared down the corridor, unaware that every step she took deeper into the estate was drawing her closer to a truth long buried. Inside the quiet estate, unseen forces seemed to awaken, as if the past itself had begun to breathe again. Leora's charm grew warm once more, faintly pulsing, as though responding to something hidden deep within the estate walls. Renwick sensed it too, and his expression hardened, knowing the moment of truth was drawing near. Leora stepped into the chamber prepared for her, unaware of what awaited. Everything was about to change as the hidden truth inside her finally began to awaken, fully, now indeed suddenly. Now tell me, if you were Leora, would you trust the estate or the man who brought you there? And what do you think the charm is protecting her from? I will be watching the comments closely to see who understands what is truly happening. The Veilheart estate did not sleep that night. Every corridor held a different kind of silence, as if the walls themselves were listening for something that had not yet arrived but was already expected. Leora Mirwen was placed in a chamber at the far east wing, where the windows overlooked the broken gardens and the wind carried sounds like distant warnings. She sat at the edge of the narrow bed, still wearing the same worn garments from the auction, her hands resting over the leather charm that now felt heavier than before. It pulsed faintly, not with light, but with a strange warmth that seemed to respond to her breathing. Outside her door, 2 guards stood without speaking. They were not told to treat her as a prisoner or guest, only to watch. Down the hall, Renwick Veilheart spoke with the estate physician and 3 trusted advisors in a sealed study lined with old maps. The physician repeated his findings, slower this time, as though repetition might make it less impossible. The life within her was stable, he said again. Not ordinary, not fragile, but protected in a way that defied known laws of medicine. He avoided using the word miracle, though it hung in the air anyway. One of the advisors, an older man with sharp eyes named Harlan Miss, immediately questioned whether the auction house had staged deception. Another suggested poisoning or hidden manipulation. But Renwick did not respond to either. Instead, he placed the leather charm on the table. The moment it touched the wood, the candle flames flickered. That was when Harlan Miss went quiet. Renwick asked for every record tied to Border ruins within the last 20 years. The physician hesitated before revealing that similar cases had once been whispered about in forgotten medical circles, but never confirmed. In another part of the estate, Leora stood suddenly as a knock echoed at her door. It was not a guard this time, but an elderly servant woman carrying warm water and clean cloth. The servant avoided eye contact, but paused briefly when she saw the charm glowing faintly in Leora's hand. "You should not remove it," the servant whispered before quickly leaving. Leora stared after her, unsettled. Elsewhere, in the lower halls, a rider arrived under heavy rain. He did not use the main gate. Instead, he entered through a side passage known only to those who once served the estate in older times. The rider carried a sealed letter marked with a broken crest. He demanded an immediate audience with Renwick Velahart. The guards hesitated, then escorted him upward. In the study, Renkwich opened the letter without breaking seal protocol. His expression did not change at first, but the air in the room tightened as he read. The letter spoke of a surviving blood thread, a lineage thought erased, a child marked by protections, seals older than the current crown. Harlan Miss stepped back instinctively. The physician lowered his gaze. Renwick asked only one question: who sent it? The rider answered with a name that had not been spoken in official court records for over a decade: Councillor Brannock Holt. At that moment, Renwick understood the second layer of the problem. Leora was not simply taken from an auction. She had been placed there as bait. Back in her chamber, Leora's breathing quickened again. The charm began to warm more intensely, and for the first time, she felt something like pressure inside her memory, as if something sealed was trying to rise. Images flickered in her mind, not clear, not complete. A dark corridor, voices arguing, a hand placing the charm into her grasp before everything turned into confusion and smoke. She pressed her palm against her temple, trying to steady herself. The guards outside shifted uneasily, but did not enter. At the same time, Renwick left the study without announcing his departure. He moved through the estate corridors alone, passing portraits that seemed to follow his steps. When he reached Leora's chamber, he did not knock. He entered. Leora turned sharply, instinctively stepping back, but stopped when she saw his expression. It was no longer the controlled silence from the auction house. Something heavier had settled there. "You were not sold," he said quietly. Leora did not understand. Renwick placed the letter on a table near her. "You were delivered." Her fingers tightened around the charm. He explained, nothing fully, only fragments. A council divided, a sealed lineage, a belief that something dormant could return through blood alone. Leora shook her head slightly, insisting she had no memory of any such thing. But then the charm reacted again. This time, it did not warm gently, it pulsed sharply. The candles in the room dimmed for a moment, as if something unseen had passed through them. Renwick noticed immediately. From the corridor outside, one of the guards called out suddenly, warning that someone had entered the outer grounds without permission. A second later, an explosion of shouting echoed through the estate gates. Renwick moved to the window. In the distance, torchlight gathered at the edge of the property. Not soldiers, not estate guards, men wearing council insignias. At their center stood a figure in a dark traveling coat, unmoving, watching the estate with patience rather than urgency. Councillor Brannock Holt had come in person. Leora stepped closer to the window without realizing it. The moment she saw the distant figure, her body reacted before her mind did. A sharp pain flickered through her chest, followed by a wave of recognition she could not place. The charm burned warm against her palm. Renwick closed the window curtain immediately. "No one opens the gates," he ordered through the speaking chain. The estate guards responded, but the council forces did not retreat. Instead, they raised a sealed decree. Leora was declared property of the crown under ancient jurisdiction laws tied to unrecorded lineage claims. Inside the chamber, Leora slowly sank back onto the bed, her breathing uneven. The weight of the words made no sense, yet the fear they carried felt real. Renwick turned to her. "This is not about ownership," he said. "It is about what you are connected to." She asked quietly what she was supposed to be. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked at the charm again, and said that whatever protected her life was not random. It was designed. At that moment, a distant horn sounded from the estate gate. The council had begun the first demand for entry. Renwick left the room without hesitation. Leora remained alone again, staring at the charm as its warmth slowly faded into a steady pulse. And somewhere beyond the walls, Brannock Holt finally spoke the reason for his arrival aloud to his men. The girl was not meant to be found alive. She was meant to be awakened. Back to Renwick. He descended the central staircase of the estate with steady steps, his mind already calculating the distance between the outer gates and the council formation. Every servant who crossed his path moved aside without being told, sensing the shift in authority that had settled over the building. At the lower armory hall, he ordered the guards to prepare without delay. Not for war in its formal sense, but for containment. The estate was never meant to be a battlefield. Yet tonight, it would hold its ground against men who believed law could be rewritten by arrival alone. Harlan Miss joined him briefly, asking if they should present Leora to the council to avoid escalation. The suggestion ended the moment it was spoken. Renwick refused with a single glance, and no further argument followed. In Leora's chamber, the air had grown heavier. She felt it pressing against her thoughts, making it harder to separate memory from imagination. The charm in her hand now vibrated faintly, not violently, but with increasing urgency, as if responding to voices outside the estate walls. She stood again, moving toward the door without knowing why. The guards outside stiffened but did not stop her. They had received no order to restrain her unless instructed. Leora placed her palm against the door wood. For a brief instant, she thought she heard something beyond it. Not words, but presence. Something familiar in a way she could not explain. At the gates, Brannock Holt remained still while his men prepared the decree for final reading. He did not appear concerned by the delay. Instead, he studied the estate as if measuring how long it would take for everything inside to align with his expectations. Renwick arrived at the gate line alone, stopping a short distance from the council formation. The wind moved between them, carrying dust and torch smoke. Brannock finally spoke directly, announcing that the estate was harboring a subject of sealed origin. He stated that refusal to surrender her would be considered rebellion against Crown law. Renwick replied calmly that Crown law did not extend into erased records. The statement caused a ripple among the councilmen. Brannock raised the decree higher, insisting that the girl's existence had already been confirmed through ancestral verification marks. He added that her awakening would determine the balance of authority between surviving noble houses. Renwick took one step forward, only one, and said that awakening something sealed did not belong to politics, but to consequences no council could control. Behind him, the estate gates remained shut, but tension within the grounds reached its peak. Every guard stood ready without movement, waiting for the first breach. Inside the chamber, Leora's charm suddenly cooled, as if reacting to Renwick's distance. She looked down at it, confused by the shift, and for the first time felt a strange emptiness when it stopped responding. Then, from far outside, a low sound echoed through the ground. Not an explosion or command, but only a signal. Leora's breath caught. Something inside her memory moved again, closer than before. Renwick sensed it instantly, and turned slightly toward the estate, knowing the timing had changed. Whatever Brannock Holt believed he was controlling had already begun to slip beyond his reach, and Leora's sealed past was no longer waiting quietly to remain hidden inside the Valahart estate itself. Renwick Veilhart stood at the broken line of the estate gates as the low signal rolled across the ground again, deeper this time, like something buried shifting after years of silence. The council forces tightened their formation, but even they hesitated, sensing that the estate itself was no longer responding in predictable ways. Behind him, the heavy iron gates groaned without being touched. Inside the estate, Leora Mirwen felt it too. The charm in her hand had gone completely still, as if holding its breath. Then, without warning, a sharp pulse ran through it and into her palm, forcing her fingers to open slightly. She did not drop it, but she felt something inside her chest answer the same rhythm. Her knees weakened for a moment. The chamber walls flickered, with candlelight that bent strangely, as if the air itself had thickened. Outside, Brannock Holt raised his hand. The decree in his grasp was no longer just paper. It was an authority prepared to become a force. His men advanced one step toward the gate line. Renwick did not move. Instead, he spoke a single order to the estate command chain behind him. Activate inner seals. The words traveled quickly through the estate. Deep mechanisms hidden within stone foundations awakened for the first time in years. A sound like shifting locks echoed under the ground, spreading outward in controlled sequence. The council forces paused again, realizing too late that the estate was not only defending its surface, it was sealing itself from within. Inside the chamber, Leora felt the floor beneath her feet tremble gently. She steadied herself against the wall, breathing unevenly as fragmented images began to rise without permission. A corridor of stone, a distant voice calling her name, the charm placed carefully into her hand by someone whose face she could not fully see. Her vision blurred, then sharpened. She saw herself smaller, standing behind a heavy curtain, while voices argued outside a sealed room. The tone was urgent, frightened, and final. Then a sharp command. Separation, protection, erasure. The memory broke apart again, leaving her gasping. At the gates, Brannock Holt finally ordered his men to present the second decree. This one was older, its edges sealed in black wax that had not been broken in years. It carried authority, not from current rule, but from archived succession law. Renwick's eyes narrowed as he recognized it. A law tied to inheritance of sealed bloodlines. Not ownership, but activation. Brannock declared that refusal would result in forced retrieval under Crown justification. The estate guards shifted uneasily. Even they understood what that meant. Once such a decree was enforced, resistance would not be treated as defense, but as rebellion against lineage, order itself. Renwick stepped forward just enough for his voice to carry clearly. "You are not here for retrieval," he said. "You are here because you fear what happens if she remembers first." A flicker passed through Brannock's expression, brief but real. That was enough confirmation. Inside the estate, Leora left the chamber without instruction. No guard stopped her. Something about her movement carried a quiet pressure that made hesitation feel unnatural. She walked through the corridor, the charm now warm again, guiding rather than burning. Each step brought her closer to the central hall, where older portraits lined the walls. As she passed them, she noticed something she had not before. The faces were not strangers. They were blurred echoes of the same features she had glimpsed in her. Fragmented memory, her breathing slowed. The estate was not unfamiliar. It was an incomplete memory. At the outer gates, Renwick heard movement from inside the estate, through the silent chain network. He realized she was no longer in the chamber. He did not turn back. Instead, he gave a second command. open inner passage alignment. The ground beneath the estate shifted again, and hidden routes long sealed began to realign. Doors that had not been opened in decades responded to inherited codes, carried only within certain blood recognition systems. Brannick saw the change and reacted immediately. He ordered a partial breach. His men advanced. Steel met stone at the gate line as the first clash began, not full war, but controlled force testing the estate barrier. Renwick met the first wave himself. He did not draw attention to violence, only efficiency. Each movement was measured, designed to stop advancement rather than escalate it. The estate guards followed his lead, forming structured resistance instead of chaotic defense. But the real shift was not outside. It was inside the estate core. Leora reached the central hall. The ceiling above her stretched high with suspended lantern chains that swayed slightly despite no wind. At the center of the hall stood an old stone pedestal covered in dust and time markings. Her charm suddenly reacted violently. A beam of faint light rose from it, not bright, but precise, pointing directly toward the pedestal. Leora stepped closer without hesitation, her hand lifted instinctively. The moment the charm touched the stone surface, the entire hall responded. Hidden inscriptions along the floor began to reveal themselves, lines forming patterns that had been invisible until now. The air filled with a low resonance, like a memory unlocking soundlessly. At the gate, Renwick felt it immediately. His eyes shifted toward the estate interior. Brannick noticed the change in his focus and understood something had begun inside. He gave a final order for full breach. The council forces pushed harder, but the estate was no longer static. Walls that once stood as stone began responding to internal activation sequences, shifting control from defense to recognition. Inside the hall, Leora stepped back slightly as the pedestal cracked open along fine lines. Not breaking, but unfolding. Inside was a sealed compartment containing a second object identical in form to her charm, but older, heavier, marked with deeper engraving. Her breath stopped. The two objects responded to each other instantly. Outside, Renwick broke formation for the first time and moved toward the estate interior. Brannick saw it and followed immediately with a select unit, abandoning outer containment logic. His objective had changed from control to interception. Within the estate, Leora lifted the second object carefully. The moment it left the pedestal, the entire estate trembled. Not violently, awakeningly. Hidden corridors unlocked in sequence. Forgotten passageways lit faintly with embedded markers that had not been active in years. Leora dropped to one knee, overwhelmed by the sudden pressure of memory returning in fragments too fast to separate. She saw a figure again, closer this time. A voice telling her that survival was not escape, but delay. Renwick reached the central hall entrance just as the resonance stabilized. He stopped when he saw both objects now held within Leora's hands. His expression shifted for the first time since the auction, not surprising. Confirmation. Brannick arrived, seconds later, halting at the edge of the hall as the sealed markings on the floor aligned into a complete pattern beneath Leora. The council forces behind him faltered. Because the estate was no longer reacting to authority, it was reacting to her presence. Leora slowly stood, still shaken, holding both charms as they aligned perfectly, producing a soft, synchronized pulse that echoed through every corridor of the estate. Renwick stepped forward slightly, but did not reach for her. Brannick spoke sharply, ordering immediate containment. But the decree in his hand began to lose clarity, the ink fading at its edges, as if no longer recognized by the system beneath the estate. Leora lifted her eyes for the first time since the memory surge began, and the entire structure seemed to respond. The estate doors closed automatically, not to trap her, but to separate what had been awakened from what still refused to accept it. Renwick finally spoke, voice lower than before. "You were never meant to be found at an auction." Leora held the two charms tighter as the truth inside her continued to rise, no longer waiting for permission to exist. The central hall of Valeheart Estate stood frozen beneath the weight of awakening truth. Hidden inscriptions glowed faintly across the stone floor while the two charms in Leora Myrwan's hands pulsed together in steady rhythm, as though answering a call that had waited years to be heard again. Brannick Holt stared at her with something darker than fear. Recognition, not the recognition of a lost girl, the recognition of a danger returning. The councilmen behind him shifted uneasily as the old decree in Brannick's hand continued fading line by line. Ancient authority was dissolving before their eyes, stripped away by forces older than Crown Law itself. Renwick Valeheart moved slightly closer to Leora, though he kept enough distance to avoid startling her. He understood now that the estate was responding directly to her presence. Every hidden mechanism beneath the foundation had awakened because she had returned. Not arrived. Returned. Leora struggled to steady her breathing as fragments of memory crashed harder against her mind. She saw fire reflecting across polished floors. She heard footsteps running through underground corridors. A woman's voice repeated the same words again and again. Protect her before dawn. The memory vanished before she could grasp more. Brannick suddenly stepped forward, his composure cracking for the first time since arriving at the estate. "She cannot remain here," he declared sharply. "You do not understand what will happen if the seal completes itself." Renwick's gaze darkened. "You fear the truth becoming visible." Brannick ignored him and focused entirely on Leora. He told her the estate was lying to her, that hidden bloodlines only brought ruin, and that the miracle she carried would destroy every noble house tied to the old succession order. Leora tightened her grip on the charms. Something inside her resisted his words instinctively, even before her mind understood why. The hall trembled again. This time, the sound came from below. A deep grinding noise rolled upward through the stone foundations, and suddenly, one section of the floor near the pedestal split apart, revealing a descending staircase hidden beneath centuries of sealed stone. Cold air rushed upward from the darkness below. Every guard stepped back. Even Brannick froze. Renwick looked toward the staircase without surprise. He had suspected hidden chambers existed beneath the estate, but not that they would reveal themselves this way. Leora stared downward as another fragment of memory struck her violently. A child crying underground. A silver key stained with blood. A voice whispering that the lower chamber must never be opened, unless the rightful heir returned willingly. Her body swayed from the pressure of it. Renwick immediately noticed and ordered the physician forward. But Leora raised her hand slightly, stopping him before he reached her. "I remember pieces," she whispered. The words settled over the hall heavily. Brannick's expression hardened at once. "Then we are already too late." Without warning, he signaled his men. Steel rang through the chamber as council guards rushed forward toward the staircase. Renwick reacted instantly. Valeheart guards intercepted the advance before they could reach Leora. The hall erupted into controlled chaos as blades collided beneath flickering lantern light. Servants fled from the upper corridors while dust rained lightly from the trembling ceiling. But Brannick was not trying to seize the estate. He was trying to reach the chamber below first. Leora understood that much immediately. The charms in her hands pulsed faster as if warning her. Renwick moved toward her through the fighting, his voice calm despite the violence surrounding them. "You cannot go below alone." Leora looked toward the staircase again, unable to explain why she already knew something waited there specifically for her. Not treasure, not power. Truth. Brannick suddenly broke through the fighting line himself, moving faster than anyone expected for a man of his age. His expression was no longer controlled political restraint. It carried desperation. "You were never meant to survive infancy," he shouted toward Leora. The entire hall fell silent for one terrible second. Leora stared at him, stunned. Brannick's breathing had grown uneven, but he continued anyway. He revealed that years ago, several noble houses learned of a child, born carrying an inherited seal tied to forgotten succession claims older than the current monarchy. That child was believed capable of restoring authority that many powerful families had spent years burying, so they decided the bloodline had to disappear. Leora's hands trembled. Renwick's eyes sharpened dangerously. Brannick admitted that the child had been taken during a violent purge, meant to erase every surviving trace of the old lineage. Records were burned, witnesses vanished, entire estates collapsed under manufactured accusations. But the child survived. Leora survived. The realization struck her harder than any memory fragment before it. Her entire life had not been random suffering. It had been organized destruction. Brannick stepped closer carefully. "You should have remained hidden," he said. "Instead, you returned to the one place capable of awakening the seal completely." Leora looked at the staircase again. The warmth inside the charms intensified. Another memory surfaced suddenly. She saw Renwick younger, standing beside a man whose face remained blurred by memory. Papers scattered across a table. Raised voices. A warning that betrayal had already entered the council. Then flames. The memory vanished sharply. Leora looked toward Renwick with confusion. "You knew something," she said quietly. Renwick did not deny it. Years ago, before becoming Duke, he had uncovered fragments of a hidden purge involving noble children connected to erased succession claims. But every witness disappeared before proof could surface publicly, until the auction, until her. Brannick laughed bitterly. "You searched for ghosts while the council protected the kingdom from collapse." "The kingdom," Renwick replied coldly. "Or your own control over it." The fighting resumed again around them as councilmen attempted another push toward the staircase. Leora suddenly moved, not backward, forward. Before anyone could stop her, she stepped onto the hidden staircase, descending beneath the estate. The charms glowed brighter immediately. Renwick followed without hesitation. Brannick cursed under his breath and ordered pursuit. The underground passage stretched deep beneath the estate foundations, lined with old stone walls, carved with markings identical to those on the charms. Lantern flames flickered strangely as they descended, reacting to movement within the narrow corridor. Leora's breathing grew uneven again as more memories returned. She remembered being carried through these tunnels as a child. She remembered someone crying. She remembered promises spoken through panic. And then she remembered the face of the woman who had hidden the charm in her hand before disappearing forever. Her mother. Leora stopped abruptly. Pain crossed her expression as emotion collided with memory, all at once. Renwick remained beside her silently, allowing her space while staying close enough to protect her if necessary. Behind them, footsteps echoed closer. Brannick and several guards were descending rapidly. The corridor opened into a vast underground chamber. Moments later, dust filled the air. Ancient banners hung torn along the walls. At the center of the chamber stood a cradle shaped from carved stone, untouched despite the years surrounding it. Leora approached slowly. The moment she reached it, both charms reacted violently, producing a low resonance that echoed through the chamber like distant thunder. Then the cradle opened. Inside rested a sealed collection of documents, protected beneath layers of preserved cloth and wax. Brannick reached the chamber entrance just as Renwick lifted the top document carefully. His expression changed immediately. The papers were not myths, they were records. Official records proving that the old bloodline had not rebelled against the crown, as history claimed. They had been betrayed by council members seeking power through manufactured succession crises. Brannick lunged forward instantly. "You cannot let those records leave this chamber." The remaining guards surged behind him. Chaos exploded underground as steel clashed again in the narrow space. Renwick fought to block advancement while Leora held the recovered documents protectively against her chest. Brannick's desperation turned reckless. He knocked over one of the ancient lantern stands during the struggle. Fire spread across dry banners immediately. Smoke filled the chamber ceiling. Leora looked around in horror as flames climbed and rapidly through cloth, preserved for decades. Brannick tried to reach her through the confusion, but collapsing wood beams blocked his path. Renwick seized Leora's arm firmly enough to guide her without harm and forced a retreat toward the staircase. The underground chamber burned behind them as the truth hidden beneath Veilahart Estate threatened to vanish forever again. But before leaving completely, Leora looked back one final time, and through smoke and flame, she saw something else hidden inside the collapsing chamber wall. A sealed crest identical to the one carried by the child within her. The miracle was not separate from the bloodline. It was the bloodline itself. And somewhere behind the fire, Brannick Holt realized with growing terror that the very thing he spent years trying to erase had already survived long enough to return stronger than before. Smoke surged through the underground chamber as burning banners collapsed from the stone walls one after another. The heat thickened rapidly, swallowing the old records hidden beneath decades of silence. Leora Merwin held the rescued documents tightly against her chest, while Renwick Veilahart guided her toward the staircase through falling debris and rising sparks. Behind them, Brannick Holt shouted orders through the chaos, but his men were already retreating from the spreading fire. Panic had replaced discipline. The chamber was collapsing faster than anyone expected. A burning beam crashed between the council guards, forcing them backward. Renwick looked over his shoulder briefly, realizing the underground hall would not survive much longer. "Move," he ordered firmly. Leora climbed the staircase beside him, her breathing strained from smoke and shock, yet she refused to release the documents. Every step upward felt heavier as fragments of memory continued returning without warning. She remembered hidden meetings inside the estate years ago. She remembered hearing the name Brannick Holt, whispered with fear. Most painfully, she remembered her mother kneeling before another nobleman, begging him to protect her child before the council arrived. That nobleman had been Renwick's father. The realization struck her deeply. By the time they reached the upper corridor, flames had already spread through portions of the estate foundation. Servants rushed through halls carrying water, while guards fought to contain the fire before it reached the central wing. Renwick quickly ordered evacuation of the lower floors. Leora stood near the corridor wall trying to steady herself when another sharp memory surfaced, unexpectedly. A hidden carriage leaving the estate before dawn, her mother placing the charm around her wrist. A final promise. You must live long enough for the truth to return. Leora closed her eyes tightly as emotion crashed through her chest. The miracle everyone feared was never some mysterious power waiting to destroy kingdoms. It was survival itself, the survival of a bloodline deliberately erased. Renwick noticed her trembling hands and moved closer, though he still maintained careful distance. He asked quietly if she could walk. Leora nodded once. Before either could speak further, heavy footsteps thundered through the hall. Brannick Holt emerged from the smoke, covered in ash and fury, followed by several remaining guards. His calm political mask had vanished completely now. He no longer looked like a respected counselor. He looked hunted. You still do not understand what those records will cause, Brannick warned harshly. If the truth reaches the crown, every noble house tied to the purge will fall. Renwick answered coldly. Then perhaps they should. Brannick's expression darkened further. He revealed that the purge had not been organized by greed alone. Years earlier, whispers spread across the kingdom, claiming the old bloodline carried inherited authority capable of shifting succession rights entirely. Fear consumed the council. Powerful families believed civil war would follow if the lineage survived publicly, so they chose slaughter before uncertainty. Leora stared at him in horror. Entire families had been erased because powerful men feared losing influence. Brannick stepped closer slowly. You think exposing this will restore justice? He asked bitterly. It will tear the kingdom apart. The kingdom was already broken, Renwick replied. You merely hid the fracture. The estate shook violently as another section of the underground chamber collapsed beneath them. Dust exploded through the corridor ceiling, forcing everyone backward. Brannick suddenly lunged toward Leora, not for the documents, for the charms. He understood now that the surviving records alone were dangerous, but the charms represented proof no council could deny. They connected Leora directly to the sealed lineage. Renwick intercepted him instantly. The collision sent both men crashing against the stone wall as guards surged around them. Steel flashed through smoke-filled corridors while servants fled toward the upper halls. Leora backed away instinctively, clutching the documents and charms tightly as chaos consumed the estate around her. Brannick fought with desperation sharpened by fear rather than strength. He knew everything he protected for years was collapsing within reach. During the struggle, one of the documents slipped partially free from Leora's grasp and fell open across the floor. A royal seal became visible beneath soot and age. Not forged, official. It carried signatures proving the old bloodline had once been recognized, legally before the council altered succession records. One of Brannick's own guards saw it and froze completely. Another stepped back slowly. The truth was no longer a rumor. It was documented history. Brannick noticed their hesitation and shouted for loyalty, but doubt had already spread through his remaining men. Some lowered their weapons uncertainly, while others exchanged alarmed glances. Renwick forced Brannick backward toward the stair rail. You buried children, Renwick said with controlled fury. You called it stability. Brannick's breathing grew uneven. You know nothing about sacrifice, he snapped. Your father understood why it had to be done. Leora's eyes widened instantly. Renwick went still for one dangerous second. Brannick realized too late that he had revealed more than intended. The silence that followed felt heavier than violence. You lie, Renwick said quietly, but Brannick laughed bitterly, despite blood running from the corner of his mouth. Your father signed the agreement himself, he said. He helped the council decide which families disappeared first. The words struck harder than any blade. Renwick stepped back slowly, as years of buried suspicion suddenly shifted into horrifying possibility. Leora stared at him, shocked, not because she blamed him, but because she understood instantly why he spent years hunting fragments of truth. He had been searching for proof against his own blood. The estate trembled again. This time, part of the ceiling collapsed directly behind Brannick, scattering stone across the corridor. Several guards fled entirely toward the outer halls. Smoke thickened rapidly. Leora moved toward Renwick carefully, noticing the conflict tearing across his expression. For the first time since the auction, the Duke looked uncertain. Not weak, wounded. He admitted quietly that his father disappeared shortly after the purge years ago, leaving behind sealed records and unexplained debts to the council. Renwick spent years believing the man was murdered for opposing corruption. Now he realized another possibility existed. His father may have participated willingly before regretting it too late. Brannick seized the hesitation instantly. He drew a concealed pistol from beneath his coat and aimed directly toward Leora. The corridor froze. Renwick reacted immediately, stepping between them without thought. The gunshot exploded through the estate. Servants screamed from distant halls. Leora's breath caught sharply. For one terrible second, she could not understand what happened. Then Renwick staggered. Blood spread across his side beneath torn fabric as he dropped to one knee against the stone floor. Leora rushed toward him instinctively, shock crushing the air from her lungs. Brannick attempted to reload, but one of his own guards grabbed his arm violently. Enough loyalty had broken. The remaining guards finally turned against him after witnessing the documents and hearing the truth spoken aloud. Chaos erupted again as Brannick fought against his own men desperately. But Leora barely noticed. Her attention stayed fixed entirely on Renwick. He tried to rise despite the wound, refusing help even now. But the blood loss weakened him quickly. Leora pressed trembling hands against the injury, while the physician was called urgently through the estate halls. "You cannot die now," she whispered through panic. Renwick looked at her steadily despite the pain. "I was supposed to protect you long before the auction," he admitted quietly. Another memory surfaced inside Leora instantly. She remembered seeing him once as a child during the night. She escaped the estate, younger, desperate, arguing with his father while servants prepared her hidden carriage. Renwick had tried to stop them from sending her away alone. He had failed. Tears filled Leora's eyes, though she fought to remain steady. The physician finally arrived with servants carrying medical supplies. Guards restrained Brannick nearby, while smoke continued flooding portions of the estate. The physician quickly stabilized Renwick's wound, confirming the bullet passed through without striking the heart. Relief spread visibly through the gathered servants. But the estate itself remained in danger. Fire still burned beneath the lower halls. Leora rose slowly after ensuring Renwick would survive. Then she looked toward Brannick Holt. The councillor's composure had shattered entirely. Ash covered his face, while restrained guards held him firmly against the corridor wall. "You think this ends with records?" Brannick demanded bitterly. "The Crown will never allow your bloodline to be restored peacefully." Leora stepped closer calmly. For the first time, fear no longer controlled her expression. "My bloodline survived your purge," she replied softly. "That is already more than you allowed anyone else." Brannick tried to answer, but the remaining guards dragged him away toward secure holding chambers before he could continue. Silence settled gradually through the damaged corridor. Outside, dawn finally began rising beyond the estate windows, casting pale light through drifting smoke. The long night that began at the auction house was finally breaking apart. Servants continued carrying water through the lower halls, while guards secured surviving records from the underground chamber. News of Brannick's arrest spread quickly among the estate staff, followed by whispers of the revealed documents. Nothing could remain hidden now. Leora stood near the broken stair rail, holding the charms quietly, while the first sunlight touched the corridor floor. The warmth from the charms had changed. It no longer pulsed urgently. It rested peacefully. Renwick, weakened but conscious, watched her from where the physician treated his wound nearby. For the first time since she entered his life, he no longer looked at her like a mystery needing answers. He looked at her like someone who survived the impossible. Leora slowly approached him again, once the physician stepped aside. Neither spoke immediately. Words felt smaller than everything surrounding them now. Finally, Renwick admitted the truth he should have recognized the moment he saw her at the auction. The estate had not awakened because of the charms alone. It awakened because it remembered her. Leora looked around the damaged corridor, the smoke-stained walls, the frightened servants rebuilding what remained. Then she looked back at him. "My whole life," she said quietly, "men kept deciding whether I deserve to exist." Renwick held her gaze steadily. "No one decides that now." Outside the estate, dawn spread fully across the kingdom, while distant church bells began ringing through the morning air. A new day had arrived, carrying truths powerful families spent years trying to erase. And inside Valorheart Estate, beneath ruined stone and surviving records, the miracle hidden within Leora Merwin had finally done what no council believed possible. It returned the truth alive. Do you think Renwick's father truly regretted helping the council, or do you believe there are still deeper secrets hidden inside the destroyed chamber beneath the estate? And if you had been Leora, would you forgive the kingdom that tried to erase your existence? Or would you seek revenge against every noble house involved? I will be reading every comment closely to see who truly understands the hidden meaning behind the miracle that survived.